It's your Friday daily delivery. I am Michael Rand. Glad to be back for another day, final show of the week, and hope you guys are having a great day out there and have had a great week. It's first week back really from break for a lot of us. If you got some time off during the holidays or even just a long weekend after New Year's and another long one before that for Christmas, this first week back is a little bit of it's a challenge, especially if you've got kids, right? They're back in school. Everyone's just kind of tired getting back to like a regular schedule, a regular routine, things like that. We've definitely felt that in our house, but it also feels good sometimes to get back to doing the things you love to do kind of regularly. The time off feels great, but also so does kind of getting back into the things that you love to do. And one of those things for me, of course, is this show. So happy to be here today. A great show coming up. Rachel Blount will join me here in a little bit. Star Tribune writer. Talk about the PWHL, the new professional women's hockey league that Minnesota is a part of. Played their opener on Wednesday, won 3-2 at Boston. Home opener Saturday at XL Energy Center. More than 7,000 tickets already sold for that game against Montreal. It's an afternoon game. Rachel will talk us through kind of how this league came to be formed, what Minnesota's place is in it, who is on this team, what this operation even looks like, things like that. But it's been an impressive thing to watch so far, a very professional league in all aspects, and Rachel will dive into that with me here in just a little bit. Got to talk about Vikings a little bit at the end of the show, and a Ricky Rubio thought at the end of the show as well. Rubio announcing essentially his retirement from the NBA in a statement on Thursday. Longtime Timberwolves point guard. We'll get into Ricky Rubio's legacy with the Wolves here in a little bit. Got a wild thought in just a second here. First, though, we got to start with the Gopher men's basketball team. And what did I miss? Gophers men's basketball team beats Michigan 73-71 in Ann Arbor. One of the biggest wins of the Ben Johnson coaching era. Haven't been enough of them, but right now feeling pretty good about where this team is. I'm not ready to say this is a good team, right? This is a team that beat up on a lot of bad non-conference teams, but a team that has enough to withstand the loss of their leading scorer, Dawson Garcia, to win that game against Nebraska earlier this year, and to go on a nice little run during non-conference play. That got my attention. Now, this game against Michigan, by the way, this is not a great Michigan team, of course. They're 6-8 now. Juwan Howard is coaching the team. He's not running around the court with the Fab Five. This is not the Michigan team that you might have remembered from a generation ago, or even just a few years ago when they were competing for Big Ten titles and national titles. That said, this is still a name brand program. This is still a road win at Michigan. A game where they had to show some poise. They were down in the second half, then they were up 7 late, got down to 2, needed a defensive stop at the end, got that defensive stop, didn't foul, win the game 73-71, balanced scoring again. And the thing we can say about this team right now is that even if we're not ready to say this is a good team yet, this is a much better team than we've seen. This is Ben Johnson's best team by far. He seems to have done much better work in the transfer portal this time around. Elijah Hawkins can play. Elijah Hawkins, their point guard, he can play. Mike Mitchell, he can play. Those two guys have kind of asserted themselves, put themselves into different roles, different echelons in the last handful of games. And now that Dawson Garcia is back, now that you see continued emergence of Farrell Payne, you see the continued emergence of Cam Christie, Braden Carrington is back now, Josh Ola Joseph. Like there's players up and down this roster, not superstars, but players, guys who can score, guys who are good two-way players, guys like Hawkins who can distribute. There's enough players in any given night and any given possession that they can score, that they're not dependent on one or two guys, that they have the ability to withstand runs, to get baskets, to not fall into these huge holes usually in games. So just one game. Again, we don't want to make too much of one game, but the cause to celebrate if you're the Gophers. You've got to take your wins where you can. You've got to take your positive momentum where you can. A win at Michigan in any circumstance is going to be one that gets people's attention. 2-1 in the Big Ten now, 11-3 overall. Home game 2 days from now against Maryland. Another chance to get a Big Ten win, 3-1 if they win that game, and getting some serious buzz. Already getting some buzz right now, I would say. Already kind of catching some people's attention, getting some buzz. That game on Sunday, if they win that game, they should get a little bit of a bump on attendance from winning this game. If they can win that game, go to 3-1, then they will have a full state's attention. Not forever, perhaps. These things can be fleeting, but that would get people's attention in a different sort of way, which they already have. If they're starting to build that right now, winning at Michigan, they can sustain that even more if they win Sunday against Maryland. The Wild, unfortunately, are building a different kind of momentum. Lost their fourth straight game, 4-1 to the Lightning on Thursday night. Team decimated by injuries. We know that. Gustafsson is out. That hurts. He'd been playing so well since the coaching change. Kaprizov is out. That's your all-star, your best player, your superstar. Zuccarello, Brodin, Spurgeon. I mean, these are like some of your, probably 4 or 5 of your very best players, guys who are taking up, a bulk of your salary cap, a bulk of your active salary cap. I think I saw in Sarah McClellan's story the other day that, counting the Suter and Parisi buyouts, they've got more than $50 million worth of contracts not playing right now. And the NHL salary cap, that's like 65% of your salary cap not playing right now. That's an explanation. They would never use that as an excuse. That is an explanation, though, and that means they are in trouble because none of these guys seem like the return is necessarily imminent. None of these are like season-ending injuries, but even if a lot of these guys are out for another handful of games, Marcus Foligno, even if these guys are out for another handful of games, they're in such a spot right now where they put themselves in such an early season hole with that 7-game losing streak that preceded Dean Evanson's firing. If they have another stretch like that, which are already 4 losses in a row now, if they have another stretch like that, it becomes very hard to climb back out of that. Left themselves with very little margin for error. Even 4 games ago before this streak started, you're like, okay, they got themselves kind of back to this like even line almost, and now it's like, well, now they're right back kind of where they were before. Maybe not quite that bad, but kind of slid back right into that spot where you're just on the very fringe of the playoff race, and you're just kind of scraping for every win. It's a tough spot to be in, especially when you have so many injuries. And I don't feel a terrible sense of optimism right now with this team because of the injuries, because of all those lingering things. Bill Guerin talked to the media the other day, kind of talking about no excuses, but he would really love to see what this team looked like at full strength. Newsflash to that, most teams aren't going to be at full strength for most of the year. I know that the Wild have had more injuries than most, especially to key players, coming at a bad time, coming in bunches, but I feel like the season is kind of on a precipice right now, kind of on a tipping point right now where it can go one way or the other. They can either kind of weather this storm, get a couple unexpected wins to kind of carry themselves through until a lot of these guys come back, or it could go a really negative way where then you're like, even if you play out of your mind for the last 40, 50 games of the season, it's not going to be enough to get you back where you want to be.
Grand Casino would like to take a moment and salute the true football fan. The passion, the hope, the anticipation, that incomparable feeling of winning. Grand Casino would also like to take a moment to remind you that you can find all that anticipation, thrill, and winning at Grand Casino. Grand Casino, let your story begin.
I have Star Tribune writer Rachel Blount with me here today. Rachel, I want to talk about the PWHL, the new Minnesota team in this league. A lot of us kind of familiar with some of the history of hockey and women's hockey in Minnesota, but this feels like a new chapter. Just had their first game Wednesday. They won in Boston 3-2, and now the home opener Saturday at XL Energy Center. Feels like there's a lot of buzz and a lot of kind of good momentum for this league right now, but I kind of want to kind of pick your brain on what this all is and where we're going from there.
There really is a lot of buzz and momentum, and I think the main reason for that is this league is beginning from a much more solid foundation than previous women's pro hockey leagues in North America. They've got really solid financial backing. And in fact, the financial backers, Mark Walter, who is the primary owner of the Los Angeles Dodgers, co-owner of the Lakers, the guy that's steeped in big time men's professional sports, they haven't put any ceiling on what they're willing to spend. And in fact, have said they understand that it's going to take a lot of money to get this league off the ground. So far, they have absolutely delivered on the promise to make this a professional league on par with men's professional leagues. Everything about it so far has been extremely legit.
Well, that's great. I mean, and it feels like, it came kind of fast. I mean, these teams, Minnesota doesn't even have a nickname yet, right? Any of these teams don't have a nickname, right? Does that feel like, that element kind of struck me, but I'm sure there's an explanation for that.
You know what I think is really interesting about this, Mike, is you're absolutely right. Nobody has a nickname. The team colors may not be permanent. Everybody's got team colors, but those may change. They've been very open about the fact that, there are some of the things that you would expect a sports franchise to have before they launch, like a nickname and a logo, that they don't have those. And the reason behind that is Stan Kasten, who is the Dodgers president and one of the people that is on the board of the league, said that he was advised by any number of people in professional sports to put this off for a year. When the league was announced last summer, folks came to Kasten and said, you're nuts if you think you're going to play this season. You've got to give it a year. You've got to give yourself time to get all these pieces in place. And his position and the rest of the board's position was they didn't want these women to have to wait another year.
Yeah.
These women have fought for so long and they have fought so hard to get a truly professional league that the backers of the league thought we need to let them play as soon as we can and not say, oh, just wait another year. So that's the reason why they've just jumped in feet first here and gone ahead without having some of those details in place.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's a curiosity piece, but it's not like you absolutely need it. So, what does it matter at this point? But, they have the opener in Boston. They win. The Minnesota franchise wins 3-2. There's, several thousand in attendance at some of these early games. What struck you? You covered the first game. You covered it remotely. What struck you about, the production, the game itself, and things like that?
The level of play was phenomenal. And I think that's what people can expect from this league is, for the first time, this is a women's pro hockey league that has all the best players in the world playing in it. Previous U.S. or North American women's pro leagues didn't have everybody. We just came out of an era where we had two separate leagues. So now we've got all the best women playing in the same league. It is very much the level of Olympic women's hockey. Anyone who has watched the Olympic women's hockey tournaments the last few Olympic cycles, that's the kind of play they're going to see here. Is really fast, great playmaking, outstanding goaltending. That's what we saw last night. Boston had an absolutely terrific offense. They have a number of Minnesota players on their team, people like Hannah Brandt, Gigi Marvin. They were terrific last night, and they were relentless in their attack. They put 35 shots on net, but Minnesota has a goaltender, Nicole Hensley, one of the United States national team goaltenders, and she was amazing last night. She made so many highlight reel saves. It was just phenomenal to watch. So that's what people can expect is from the level of play. And for the TV broadcasts, again, for the first time, they're on a legitimate network. The games are being broadcast on Bally Sports North, and the production values last night were very high. The announcers were quite good. They had all the camera angles that one would expect from a regular broadcast of any hockey game. It was a very polished broadcast. Video quality was high. So that was another thing that just shows that this league is legit.
Let's back up just a little bit and kind of talk about how we got here. It sounds like it came together fast, like once they announced this in the summer, then 6 months later, essentially they're playing. But like you alluded to before, prior to this, there was multiple leagues. You had Minnesota, you had the thoroughbreds playing in this league for a while. You have different iterations. How do we kind of finally get to a place where it feels like it makes a lot more sense?
The situation for the previous few years was we had the PHF, which was a professional league that had included the Minnesota Whitecaps.
The Whitecaps,
and,
right.
And then you also had the Professional Women's Hockey Players Association, which included the national team players from the U.S. and Canada. So two separate leagues. And that happened because the PHF, its original iteration, a bunch of players broke off after they didn't deliver on the salaries that they promised. They had some pay cuts. It upset players. They left and formed a separate league. So for a few years there, you had these competing leagues. And people keep asking about NHL support for this. And the NHL was quite clear during that era. They said until women's hockey can become unified behind one league, they wouldn't support it in any meaningful way. And so over the summer, Mark Walter from the Dodgers and his wife, Kimber Walter, they, in combination with Billie Jean King, who's one of the backers of the league, and Kasten from the Dodgers, they were the ones that got behind this idea of let's just start from scratch. Let's form a new league. One of the Minnesota players, Kendall Coyne-Schofield, had actually approached Billie Jean King a few years ago about, could you help us? Can you help women's hockey? So that was kind of the genesis for all of this. So it was announced in the summertime. They decided upon 6 markets. For a while, Minnesota was an outlier. It was believed at first that Minnesota would not have a team in this new league because it was expected all the teams would be clustered on the East Coast for travel concerns. The Players Association had come to an agreement that said that they needed to fly if it was more than 400 miles away. So folks were thinking, well, to hold travel costs down, they'll probably keep all the teams on the East Coast. But the league decided to give themselves the best chance of success. They needed to be in the best hockey markets. They couldn't leave out Minnesota. So that was how Minnesota got a team. We've got 6 markets now. They've talked about expansion in the future, but they are starting with 6. The league owns all 6 teams at this point. 24-game schedule. Playoffs will start in May. And in the future, they will have more games. They have very big ambitions.
You said the other 5 are on the East Coast, essentially, right? Boston, New York, and then the 3 Canada teams, Ottawa, yes, Toronto, and Montreal?
Correct, yes.
Okay, so the Minnesota already played Boston. Now they're going to host Montreal in this opener. What should we expect? All their games are at XL Energy Center, which I believe you wrote. This is the only team that's playing all of its games in an NHL arena. Obviously that's one of the best buildings in the NHL, even though it's, a quarter century old now. This is a great home for them to be in. What are their ambitions in terms of, filling that place up, tickets sold, things like that?
They've sold around 7,000 tickets for the opener. So I think we can expect a pretty good, pretty enthusiastic crowd. The Whitecaps drew well. They played at Tria Rink, and then they played at the Richfield Ice Arena for a while. And those obviously were quite small venues, but they filled them up and they had good crowds. They sold a lot of season tickets. So we do have a pretty good fan base for women's hockey here. I'm not too surprised that they're selling a lot of tickets for the first game at XL. It will be interesting to see how they do on an ongoing basis at XL, to see if that momentum continues through the season. I think it can, given the fact that the quality of play is high and the games are televised. So I think more people will get a chance to see these games on television and then say, hey, I would like to go there. So I think it should be a great atmosphere on Saturday for the opener. It's an afternoon game. Yep. I would expect a very lively crowd, a very enthusiastic crowd. I know the team will be really fired up for this. And again, it plays into this idea that this is a new kind of a pro league. This is a better, more professional, truly professional league than women's hockey has had before. It really does feel new and fresh this time.
This market has certainly supported high quality sports of all kinds, but certainly high quality women's sports. The Lynx have had huge draws, especially when they were really good. The Minnesota Aurora, you look at that recently and kind of their success story. Gopher women's basketball, when they're good, you get those big crowds there. I don't know if this is an apples and oranges comparison, but the people who put this franchise here, who kind of believe in this being here, do they draw upon some of that? Like, this is a good market for the support of women's sports in general.
Yeah, that's it. Exactly. That very much plays a part here, that the Twin Cities area has a documented history of supporting women's sports. And that was, I think, a huge marker in the favor of putting a franchise here in Minnesota. Not just the fact that it's a women's hockey hotbed, but the fact that we do have widespread support for women's sports. That was very important to them. They were smart with putting this league together. You know, they set themselves up for success in the best way they possibly could. So that certainly played a part.
On the ice, we saw one game so far. Like, what do you think we should expect from this team? You obviously say really good goaltending, some Minnesota flavor. Like, are they expected to compete for a championship this year? There's 6 teams. I just don't really know what to expect from a competitive standpoint, which we should talk about.
Yeah, I think it's a little early actually to know which teams might be your championship contenders. The talent is pretty spread out. Each team was able to sign 3 free agents to start out, and then they had a draft, and then they had a free agency period after that. So we'll see which of the general managers did the best job of choosing talent. Natalie Darwitz is the GM for Minnesota, and she has put together a roster heavy on American players, heavy on Minnesotans. There are 13 Minnesota natives on the roster. Taylor Heisey, the former Gophers star, was the number 1 pick in the draft. She scored the first goal in franchise history last night at Boston, and it was an absolute stunner. She picked up a turnover in the neutral zone, skated into the right circle, and just fired a laser that was bar down for the first goal. Just caught the goaltender completely by surprise. It was a fantastic shot. So I think we're going to see a very high talent level from Minnesota. We've got a lot of good offensive players on this team, a pretty solid defense. And I knew Hensley was a good goaltender from having seen her with the national team, but holy cow, if she plays like she played last night on a consistent basis, they're going to be hard to beat.
Yeah, well, it's exciting. I mean, it's brand new. It isn't because we've had professional women's hockey here before. But you sense, I mean, 7,000 people. It sounds like there's a pretty good groundswell around this already. Do they have any kind of do they have like a 5-year hopes and dreams kind of thing besides expansion? Like how big, I guess, can this become? Because I feel like when things are at their infancy, when it finally seems like they've figured something out, like with the pro women's basketball, you had those 2 competing leagues early. You had the WBL and the WNBA, and it was like, come on, let's have everybody work together. And that was kind of how the men's leagues have been like that too. But it's like, can you finally see what works and what doesn't work and get this together? It does feel like there's a certain kind of like trajectory that this could go on.
Yeah, and they haven't announced any concrete plans. I think the league folks are also in a bit of a wait and see mode, but the commitment is what's really fresh and new here, is the fact that you have a financial backer who has said, I'm willing to put money into this thing and take some losses to get it off the ground. I know that's going to be what it takes, and I'm in it for the long haul. Mark Walter has said this over and over and over, that he is in this for the long haul. He understands it does take time for leagues to get off the ground. So the fact that you've got the owner with the deep pockets, the fact that for the first time, there's a player agreement, there's a collective bargaining agreement in place here, and it runs for several years. So you've got your labor agreement there with your players, and the players are getting paid real professional salaries as well. Some of the players are making more than $80,000. Okay. We're past the era now where players are doing this kind of part-time and they're trying to have another job and then also make some practices and play in some games and make, 15 or 20 grand from playing hockey. We're now past that area. So I think given those things, that this league really could have some staying power. And like I mentioned, they haven't noted any concrete plans yet, but they do hope, they've mentioned in broad terms, for an expanded schedule. The 24-game schedule of this year is just a starting point. They anticipate playing more games in the future. They anticipate expansion. So, given all those factors, I think this could be a league that sticks around, does well, expands, and becomes a permanent part of the sports landscape.
Final thing for you, Rachel. Appreciate your time and expertise on this subject. The home opener is obviously Saturday, like we said, Saturday afternoon at XL Energy Center. Anything built around that aside from just the hockey game? Are there any kind of like bells and whistles that they're going to bring out for this game?
They haven't announced anything yet. I think it's kind of a wait and see for us, but I would expect that they'll have some kind of a pregame light show kind of thing, something going on with that. And other than that, we'll see. I have not seen an announcement of the anthem singer or anything like that, but I would guess that being in an NHL arena, that they'll have some high production values, let's say.
I would think so too. And at the end of the day, they'll probably let the hockey speak for itself as well. And it sounds like that was a really high level in the first game, which Minnesota won 3-2. So everybody check that out. Rachel, appreciate it as always. Thanks for all the good details and info, and we'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good, Mike. Thank you.
Great stuff from Rachel. Interested to see this debut on Saturday. And just got me thinking, what a time to be a Minnesota sports fan, right? Like, no matter what you like, you have tremendous options, right? Like, you've got pretty much any pro league, any kind of high level league you could imagine wanting to watch. You can go to those games, pretty much, whenever those seasons are happening. We got every single league, basically: baseball, football, hockey, men's and women's soccer with the Loons and the Aurora. You've got the men's and women's pro hockey here right now. And we've had a lot of these things for a long time, but I don't want us to take for granted the options we have here. Hey, you like college sports? Well, we got tons of college sports. Hey, the Gophers aren't your thing? Well, now St. Thomas is Division I. You don't love Division I? Hey, there's all sorts of lower division games. Hey, you don't like college? There's tons of great high school options. Like, every single thing feels like it is covered here, whatever your niche is, or if you're just a fan of all the sports, what a buffet you have available to you. Again, this is not breaking news, but it just got me thinking, like, if this is going to be a higher level league than the one we've been used to for women's hockey, just another level up in this market. Let us finish with the cooler. 2 thoughts. 1, Ricky Rubio announcing his retirement on Thursday. He's been stepping away from basketball for the past several months to deal with his own mental health. Decided at this point that it is time to call it a career. Obviously makes you a little bit nostalgic if you are a Timberwolves watcher. Drafted in 2009, such anticipation for when he would get here. Got here in 2011. 6 seasons with the Wolves, didn't make the playoffs in any of those first 6 years. It was just the one thing I would have wanted for Ricky Rubio in all of his time here. All the joy he brought fans, all of the good he did on the court, the person he was off the court. What I would have wanted for him is just one season here with a really good team. And that was the bummer of all of this, was that when he got traded, which was 2017, I did a huge oral history on Ricky Rubio's first stint with the Wolves, by the way, back in 2017, when it felt like he was going to be traded, and he was traded very shortly after that, that he was never on a great team. And it was just what I wanted for him, just as someone who watched him mostly from afar, what I wanted for him and what he never got was that opportunity to be on a really good Wolves team. And just as he got traded away, they made kind of a lot of those moves that the Thibodeau year, where they got Jimmy Butler, where they got Jeff Teague, where they got Taj Gibson, where they brought in a lot of those kind of veterans to fortify what they were building around with Karl Anthony Towns and Andrew Wiggins at the time. They won, I think, 47 games that year, went to the playoffs. I've always wondered, what that team might have been like if they had Rubio on that team as their point guard, kind of a glue guy, a guy who wouldn't have had to be the superstar that they were asking him to be, that they were hoping he would be when he got drafted. Someone who could have been more of a complementary player, almost like a different stage of his career, but almost like a Mike Conley to this year's team, a guy who brought such savvy, just held everything together. He might have been a great fit on that team, but we will never know about that. And the other thing I wish for him is that he would have been healthy for that entire first, that when he got here, they started clicking. He was playing great. He was just such a presence. Then he hurt his knee I was actually there for that game. I was covering that game with the media. I was on press row back when our seats were right there. I was like 10 feet away from Ricky Rubio when he tore his ACL against the Lakers. Non-contact injury. You're like, oh man, what was that? I wish that would never have happened because I wanted to know how that year would have played out had he not gotten injured. But you don't get a chance to do it over again. You'd only get a chance to see what did play out. I think he goes down as one of the most beloved Minnesota Timberwolves players of all time. From a fan perspective, he did some amazing things on the court. I wrote tons of good things about him. I wrote some not so flattering things about him. His shooting, I did some research that found he was the worst shooter in modern NBA history by some metrics. Like, such a polarizing, interesting career. But the one thing that was constant throughout it is he was a tremendous person. As much as we knew about him, he was a tremendous person always. Just a good human being, at least from what we could see, and I've never heard anything to the contrary of that. Just a remarkable person, and I'm sure he will carry that energy into a well-deserved post-playing career. Final thought, Vikings, Sunday, final game. Still a tiny slice of a chance to make the playoffs. Given that, I want to know, what are you hoping for this weekend? Do you really want to see them beat the Lions, kind of finish on a strong note, maybe, just maybe, kind of get those dominoes to fall the way they should and get into the playoffs, sneak into the playoffs as the number 7 seed? Or in the back of your mind, are you saying, hey, not the worst thing in the world if they lose, helps their draft position? I think they're in the 12th spot right now, could move up to 10, 9, even 8 under certain circumstances, gets them maybe closer to that franchise quarterback in the draft that they maybe not so desperately need, because they've got options if they re-sign Kirk Cousins, but that they really probably need to go after if they're going to make a hard reset this year and try to get themselves into Super Bowl contention and not just, hey, we made the playoffs contention like they have been in these past several years. I'm torn on that. If you're a Vikings fan, I'm torn on what you should be wanting. You never want your team to lose, but when you get to this point in the season, and it's complicated by the fact that they still have that sliver, that 3% chance to make the playoffs, it's complicated by that, but I don't think losing in this case would be the worst thing in the world, and I wonder how many Vikings fans are carrying that energy into Sunday as well. That will do it for me today. Royce and I, I'm sure, will talk tons about that game on Monday's show, as well as plenty of other stuff. Until then, enjoy your weekend. I'm Michael Rand, back at it again on Monday.